nature, in the forests. If we look around, the trees that are around us, in the woods, specifically here in New England and in Massachusetts. So good afternoon. Today's video is going to be in parts. We're going to talk about Thoreau's Country. It's a book by David Foster that talks about Henry David Thoreau and the notes that he took during the 1800s. He was a man, a philosopher, and he loved nature and adventure, like many of us do when we're kids, walking around the woods. How special it is. You could see how special it was back then. And it was definitely the kind of explorer that I like. And then the second part of the video today, we're going to be talking about more David Foster in the Harvard forest here in Massachusetts. Harvard University has a forest. There's the French Road Trail. In my class, I had a class that we took a trip over there and we walked the trail. Let's talk about Thoreau. What kind of man was he? Well, Thoreau, this is a man from the 19th century, early 19th century. Took notes of nature and its changes. Thoreau was born on July 12th, 1817, and he died May 6th, 1862. In his lifetime, he wrote over 20 volumes of books, articles, anything else, just like notes, journals. He was a big writer. In fact, reading and writing is like what he lived most of his life doing. Of course, what interested him most was nature, and he loved just observing. His book is on observations of natural environment, noticing the trees all around me are probably weren't here during the 1800s. Trees are quite young, believe it or not. Although they are older than me, they aren't as old as you may think they are. Many trees and forests are very new, and back in history, most of them weren't there, and it was all fields for farming and whatnot. Thoreau was a philosopher of nature. It's one of the things that he talks about in the book, is these short, like knee-high stone walls that you find everywhere in the forests and alongside roads. Quite an interesting history with these walls. What it is that farmers would clear out all the trees to create a field for their farms. They have to plow the ground for their crops, and there's rocks in the soil, so they have to move all these rocks, hundreds of rocks. You have to move it all into a point. So they create a border around the field with the rock walls, and it's not really for decoration or any sort of purpose, marking territory, anything like that. It's mainly just because they need to move the rocks. They do something like that with it, put it somewhere instead of making a huge pile of rocks. But essentially, that's exactly what it was. Is it just a pile of rocks lying around the property of the farms? Another thing that's kind of like philosophical that Thoreau mentions is that forests have changed throughout time. Even in his time, he was noting how forests in the past have changed so much, and yet they're the same. Because by the time Thoreau was writing his notes, these farms would have been forests. So it was before his time where there were fields and farms. And then he would write down how the forests are new and how it's changed. And we can make those same observations today, even. How from Thoreau's time to today, how it's changed magnificently, and we can notice this and create those same exact observations that Thoreau is making in the 1800s today in 2024. On that note, let's go to part 2 of this video about the French Road Trail over at the Harvard Forest. So we needed the context of Thoreau's notes before we get into the French Road Trail in Harvard's forest. So David Foster, who wrote the book Thoreau's Country on Henry David Thoreau, David Foster is a man that got his education through Harvard. And so he studied the Harvard Forest. I go to school here in Massachusetts, and we took a class trip to the Harvard Forest. And over here, I got a pan flip on the trail that we walked. French Road Trail. There's many different stops. I can actually say we stopped at every single stop on this trail with my class, and there's 17 different stops that I'm going to be talking about. The French Road Trail is a 2.5 mile loop with 17 numbered stations at points of interest along the way. Let's talk about the 17 different points of interest of this French Road Trail. The first point of interest, right when we get there, is titled Then and Now. And it says that this stone wall marks a cropland border within a 50-acre farm established in 1763 by Jonathan and Molly Sanderson. Along this trail, you will see many stone walls, most of them historically used to mark property boundaries and define the edges of pastures. A herd of cattle keeps the pasture clear of trees, and in the pasture to your right, the Fisher meteorological station records continuous weather data, one of several hundred data sets publicly available on the Harvard Forest website. Right by the first stop is the second stop, and that talks about the sugar maples. The sugar maple trees lining this road were historically used to produce maple syrup. Today, they are part of a long-term research study of how sugar maples use and store energy throughout the year. Harvard research shows that when a sugar maple produces a high number of seeds in autumn, there's less sugar in its sap the following spring. So the history with the maple trees is that they're lined next to the road, so when the travelers are riding their carriages and traveling on the road, they could collect maple syrup on the go right from the trees that they were walking by. How convenient. The third point, there's a tree diversity. Trees surrounding this sign are typical in the sites of this region that have reforested following 2 centuries of colonial agriculture. Oak, red maple, beech, birch, and other hardwood species have become prevalent. So the third point of interest just talks about the variety of trees in the forest. And the fourth stop talks about land use legacies. Every landscape has a story. Farming, logging, fire, and windstorms over the past several centuries have shaped the soil, plants, trees, and wildlife that exists here today. Different parts of the Harvard Forest have different human histories as well, including cultivated fields, pasture, and woodlot. In the research area on the right-hand side of the road, Harvard Forest scientists are tracking the long-term impact of colonial farming on today's forest. There's 5. It talks about disturbance, 2 types of forest disturbance. Another word for sudden change in the ecosystem. On both sides of the trail, snapped and uprooted trees show the footprint of a microburst storm disturbance that blew through the forest in 2014. Eventually, the chaos of these uprooted trees will flatten to small mounds and dips in the forest. Well, this is just an observation made by the students of Harvard, and they study the forest just as Henry Thoreau studied the forest all the way back in 1800s. In stop 6, it mentions that earthworms, the forest around you is dominated by sugar maple and white ash, an unusual forest type found on richer soils at the Harvard forest. On the left side of the road is one of the few areas of the property that contains earthworms. Although welcome in gardens, earthworms are not native to this part of North America. They, in fact, act as forest pests by simplifying the complex soil layers that many organisms depend on and altering the flow of water through soil. Can you imagine that earthworms are not native to the land? That in the past, in history, there was no earthworms at all over in that forest? That just kind of goes to show the human impact on the world and how humans have evolved forests of nature and how we kind of leave our footprint on this earth. And then the 7th point of interest talks about colonial rest stop. The stone foundation you see here is a remnant of the French Road Inn, built as a prosperous house in 1764 by Elisha Ward, brother of Artemus Ward, the first commander-in-chief of the American Revolution. The inn, purchased by Almond French in 1846, was well used by the Petersham, by travelers, as it was located along the main road between Athol and Petersham. Historical accounts tell us that rows of hollowed out logs near the inn served as throughs for visiting cattle and horses. And point of interest number 8, stream and stoneworks. The stonework around this stream is rather mysterious. Water flow would have been insufficient for a mill, and there's still mysteries to be uncovered in today's forest as we look as evidence of what people believe in the past. That's why archaeology is so important for learning about people and culture and just understanding how things operated. It's important to remember as history changes. People tend to forget and repeat history. At the point of interest 9, says snag. Dying or dead trees that have not yet fallen are referred to as snags. The snags you see on both sides of the trail are important sources of food and shelter for many animals, including woodpeckers, owls, small mammals, and raccoons. Small round holes in a snag indicates feeding activity by smaller woodpeckers, while large rectangular holes are made by pileated woodpeckers, the largest woodpeckers in North America. Point of interest number 10, striped maple. All along this stretch of road are striped maple trees. Point of interest number 11, forest plants. As you continue on the trail, take notice of the plants nearby. The following plants are often found in shady, moist areas: and hobblebush, partridge berry, and wintergreen. While walking the trail and observing the foliage and the plants nearby, at a certain point we notice how there's markings on the bark of small trees, indicating how animals like deer scratch their antlers against the tree and the bark, and you can see the scratches left over. Small details like that are amazing to notice when observing nature, because it's always full of life, yet sometimes in today's society you tend not to notice small things like that, small details. point of interest number 12 is the American chestnut. The tree sapling with toothed leaves and multiple trunks in front of you is an American chestnut. Before the American chestnut was devastated by the chestnut blight across its range in early 1900s, it was an important tree to the northeast for posts, lumber, and fuel. Chestnuts were an important food source for many wildlife species, including bears, deer, wild turkeys, and passenger pigeons. And people treasured their sweet, starchy taste. The blight can be detected on chestnut trees today as orange-red spores visible along cracks in the bark. Number 13, point of interest, number 13, plantaceous. It is common across Massachusetts to see large areas planted with one type of tree, like the red pine plantation to the right of the trail, planted in the late 1920s by Harvard forest students. At that time, forestry was relatively new science, and more emphasis was placed on planting and weeding to produce a single species, often a non-native conifer. Today in Massachusetts, forestry practices emphasize work with natural processes and native species. In 2007, we began logging our plantation forests to restore a diversity of native tree species in these sites. Point of interest number 14 talks about fires of the forest and kind of emphasizes how important it is for trees to burn and for there to be regrowth and new life in the forests and trees. Point of interest number 15 talks about the hemlock, which is the evergreens. Evergreen tree is a unique but threatened species in the forest. Eastern hemlocks are remarkable for their dense, shady canopies, providing winter shelter for deer, nesting sites for migrating warblers, and cold forest stream for trout. And then number 16, point of interest, is the swamp. And at the swamp you can see a marshy like plant life. The natives at the time, before any colonialists in history, would use this marshy plant as like bandages to help heal wounds. The natives were truly remarkable when it came to their understanding of the world around them and nature, and that's something that colonialists and Henry David Thoreau really admired from them and learned. And Thoreau adventured to the forests of Maine with the natives to learn even more. And then finally, at point of interest number 17, is the black gum. And the black gum, or tupelo tree, is a long-lived, delicious tree typically confined to swamps here at the northern limits of its range. Black gums are the oldest trees in the Northeast. Those surrounding you are over 300 years old. They're notable for their unusual 90-degree branches pattern and spectacular red foliage in autumn. Their scaly bark resembles alligator skin. The hard, heavy wood of the black gum tree has interlocking grain and that is nearly impossible to split. Black gums, also known as beetlebum trees, were used during the colonial period to make mallet heads. The barrel stoppers. A bit further along the trail and within reach of the boardwalk is a large black gum that is over 420 years old, the oldest living tree at Harvard Forest. So in the whole forest, the oldest living tree is 420 years old. Just think of that. The tree is so young, and that the land was completely different 420 years ago. That tree was just a little sprout. and completely different trees and different land. And you think about all the points in history and the jungles of the world and how ancient ruins look overgrown with the forests around them. The world and earth may not be as old as it seems relative to your life. So that was the Harvard forest. And in many ways, the observations that the students in Harvard make with this forest in their studies is exactly the same type of observations Henry Thoreau was making back in the 1800s. Now we're moving into part 3 of this video, the conclusion. So let's close this video today about what we learned about Henry Thoreau, David Foster, the Harvard forest, and observing nature around us. One, Henry Thoreau is a great man in history that was a philosopher of the forest, basically. He was an adventurer, an explorer, and a true inspiration to this generation and people of his time and the future. An example of that is David Foster, how he was inspired by Henry Thoreau and his studies of the forest and writing a whole book on Thoreau's writings, notes, articles, and books and journals, making sure that the future can learn how to appreciate the beauty of nature and observe around them, and to learn to understand the world that they live in. And in 3, let's talk about the beauty of nature itself and observing Earth. The forests are young and beautiful. They change in time. They were here before I was born, and they're gonna be here afterwards, and it's consistently gonna change. So I'd like to take this time to finish off the video and go right into scripture. So in Genesis chapter 1 verse 11, it says, "And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed and fruit, trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind on earth. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, the trees bearing the fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good." I hope this video can inspire whoever may be watching to appreciate the world around them, to observe the trees as you're in the car driving, or to inspire you to walk around in the woods and notice the little things like the rock walls, and think about how the trees around them are so young and new, and the rocks have been there for so long, and how people have impacted the world. It's really wonderful to unplug and take in the fresh air and be grounded on this earth. If you'd like to hear more videos like this, please like the video, comment, leave your thoughts in the comment section. I'd like to read them. If I got anything wrong, correct me. If you have any insights to add on the video, please add them. I'd love to read them. Subscribe. When you subscribe, it's really motivating to me. So if everybody that watches this video subscribes, that would be truly wonderful. And make sure to share the videos with friends and family. Discuss what I've kind of brought up in the video, and feel free to do your own research and look it up. Thoreau's Country by David Foster is a wonderful book to read. If you love nature, if you love exploring, definitely take that book. It's not really written like a novel, like a story. It's more written as journal entries from Henry David Thoreau. Perfect for camping trips and any free time you have if you love reading things like that, especially if you're from the New England region. Thank you for watching, and bye.